They dined behind velvet drapes. Their silver was polished by hand. And their recipes? Lost to time, sealed in the silence of grand mansions and gilded kitchens. In the summer of 1919, while the world stumbled through prohibition and post-war grief, America's elite gathered in parlor rooms and high-ceilinged dining halls. Their tables weren't just set, they were choreographed. Crystal, lace, fine china, and at the center of it all, recipes so refined they whispered of a forgotten class. But today, those whispers become stories again. From chilled lobster in aspic to candied violets on cream-filled charlottes, we're unlocking the secret dishes once reserved for the silk stocking district, where taste meant status and lunch was a spectacle. It wasn't just a dish, it was a quiet display of wealth. No sizzling pans. No heavy aromas. Just chilled elegance, molded into crystal cups and set delicately on silver trays. Lobster à la Newburgh in aspic was the calling card of refinement in 1919's silk stocking district, Luncheons. This wasn't served at greasy spoons or diners. No, this was the kind of recipe passed discreetly between society hostesses, written on personal stationery, locked in kitchen drawers. The dish begins with fresh Atlantic lobster, poached until just tender. Its sweetness was never meant to be overwhelmed. Instead, it was folded into a sherry-laced cream sauce, enriched with egg yolks and butter, creating a velvety texture that whispered indulgence. But what made it unforgettable was the next step, aspic. Using a clarified consommé with just the right bloom of gelatin, the lobster mixture was molded into individual cups, often in etched glass or fine porcelain. The aspic was not just for looks. It preserved freshness in the age before refrigeration was common, and gave the dish a glistening, jewel-like finish. These cups would be chilled for hours, then turned out onto delicate plates, garnished with thin cucumber fans or edible violets. To the untrained eye, it might seem modest, but among high society, this was the pinnacle of luncheon luxury. In a world recovering from war and banning alcohol, these recipes became subtle acts of opulence. No loud flavors, no excess. Just quiet perfection in every chilled bite. And today, nearly forgotten. But not anymore. In 1919, the world was changing, but the ladies of the silk stocking district held tightly to their rituals. Ivory tablecloths, handwritten place cards, and luncheon menus that hinted at faraway worlds. Curried chicken salad with chutney cream was one of those rare dishes that felt exotic without losing its grace. Inspired by British colonial flavors and imported through East Coast port cities, it was the kind of recipe whispered about after tea. Oh, you simply must try Clara's curried salad. It's divine. It started simply, cold roasted chicken, shredded by hand, not chopped. Only the tenderest pieces made the cut. Then came a delicate mixture of mayonnaise and heavy cream, blended with a touch of lemon juice for brightness. But the magic? A measured dash of Madras curry powder, imported through specialty grocers from London. It brought warmth, not heat. Aroma, not spice. Just enough to make the palate pause. And then came the flourish, a spoonful of homemade chutney, often apple or peach, reduced with vinegar and a hint of clove, folded in just before serving. The result was a salad that was creamy, fruity, and complex. Served on butter lettuce or atop chilled tomato halves, it was a centerpiece in itself. To the casual guest, it was chicken salad. To the hostess, it was global sophistication, plated in porcelain. These were the kinds of dishes that told guests, you were not just invited, you were considered. Forgotten today in favor of mayonnaise-heavy potluck fare. But in 1919, this was a culinary passport. It arrived at the table like a secret, clear as glass, cold to the touch. Inside, the tender meat of a bird no one dared waste, because it was too precious to serve twice. Truffled squab angeli wasn't just a dish, it was a demonstration of restraint, skill, and status. Squab, young domestic pigeon, was prized among the upper class for its delicacy. Not gamey like wild birds, not tough like old fowl. This meat was soft, almost buttery, but it took precision to make it sing. The preparation began with slow poaching the squab in a deeply aromatic broth, rich with mirepoix, bouquet garni, and often a touch of Madeira wine. Once cooled, the meat was carefully deboned, cut into bite-sized pieces, and layered in molds. Then came the indulgence, paper-thin shavings of black truffle, nestled between each piece of squab like edible velvet. To seal it all, a clarified consommé, turned gelatinous with veal stock or calf's foot, was poured over the arrangement. As it chilled, the flavors locked in place, encased in a crystal-clear glaze. The result? A gleaming dome of elegance. Inside, tender squab, the unmistakable aroma of truffle, and the pride of a cook who had mastered one of the most difficult arts of the time, gelée. This was not food for hunger. It was food for conversation. Served cold, unmolded with care, and often paired with nothing more than champagne and a raised eyebrow. And today, almost no one remembers it. But for a brief moment in 1919, it was the definition of refinement. And now you know why. It wasn't just what they served, it was what they left out. In the world of 1919 high-class luncheons, simplicity could be a flex. And no dish proved that more than asparagus tips with lemon hollandaise. Long before the days of industrial farming, asparagus was seasonal, expensive, and fiercely regional. Only the tenderest tops were kept, snapped by hand at their natural breaking point. No fiber stalks. No soggy spears. Just the perfect few inches as green as springtime itself. These spears were lightly steamed, never boiled. The goal wasn't softness, it was structure. They had to stand upright when plated. To sag was to signal a poorly run kitchen. But the real mark of elegance? That glossy, golden hollandaise, a sauce that separated amateurs from artisans. Made from just egg yolks, clarified butter, and lemon juice, hollandaise had to be whisked over gently simmering water, never directly over flame. Too hot and it would split. Too cool and it wouldn't thicken. Timing was everything. But for the ladies who lunched in the silk stocking district, it wasn't just a sauce. It was a symbol of control, precision, quiet indulgence. The addition of lemon zest, a subtle twist of the era, brightened the richness and balanced the butter. Poured delicately over fanned asparagus tips, it gleamed under gaslight chandeliers like edible satin. There were no loud spices. No lavish garnishes. Just nature, elevated through discipline. And today, most of us don't even remember that this used to be luxury. But back then, in 1919, this simple pairing of green and gold was enough to earn a nod from the most discerning hostess. Some dishes whispered of elegance. This one? It purred with confidence. Deviled tongue canapés weren't made to fill you up. They were made to start conversations. In 1919, beef tongue wasn't viewed with hesitation. It was considered a delicacy, especially when brined, slow-poached, and chilled, then sliced paper-thin like fine charcuterie. The texture? Silky. The flavor? Deep and mild, like the richest roast beef, but gentler. But it wasn't just the tongue that turned heads. It was how it was deviled. In elite kitchens, deviled meant something different than today's fiery spice bombs. It meant a precise blend of Dijon mustard, minced capers, anchovy paste, and a kiss of cayenne, folded into a creamy butter base. The tongue slices were chopped finely, mixed with this intense paste, and spread carefully atop toasted brioche rounds, cut into perfect circles or diamond shapes. Each canopy was topped with a garnish, a sliver of pickled shallot, a sprig of parsley, or, if the hostess really wanted to impress, a tiny quail egg slice. These weren't snacks. They were statements. Served on a silver tray by gloved staff, passed between polished gentlemen and women in elbow-length gloves, they carried more weight than the gossip that usually floated around them. And yet, they vanished. Today, we flinch at the word tongue. But in 1919, it was a mark of taste and trust in your cook. Deviled tongue canapés may not return to modern menus anytime soon. But now, you know what they once meant: audacity, elegance, and culinary wit, served in a single bite. It looked like nothing, and that was the point. Clear as amber, light as air, and cold as confidence. Consommé madrileñ was the test of a true chef in 1919's upper-class kitchens. Unlike creamy soups or heavy stews, this dish had no place to hide. A single speck of fat, a murky color, or an uneven chill, and the illusion of refinement shattered. Born from classic French technique and given a Spanish twist, this consommé started with a meticulously clarified beef or veal broth, simmered slowly with a raft, a mixture of egg whites, mirepoix, crushed tomato, and sometimes ground meat. As it simmered, the raft lifted every impurity from the stock, leaving behind a broth so clear it could reflect the chandelier above it. The madrilen twist came from the use of fresh tomatoes and sweet red peppers, giving the consommé a light crimson hue and a gentle acidity. Often served chilled, it offered a refined refreshment before heavier courses, especially during spring and summer luncheons. Presentation mattered. The soup was poured into cut glass bowls or delicate china cups, garnished with nothing more than a few finely sliced chives, or, if the host was daring, a paper-thin sliver of lemon peel curled on the surface. To modern eyes, it might seem empty. But in 1919, that emptiness was power. It was culinary restraint at its highest level, a flex understood only by those who knew how hard it was to make something this clear, this cold, and this utterly flawless. Most people today wouldn't give it a second glance. But back then, consommé madrilen wasn't just soup. It was a whisper of perfection, in a world obsessed with appearances. They looked like clouds, golden, crisp, and impossibly light. But inside? A filling so rich and decadent, it felt almost scandalous at a noontime luncheon. Vol au vent of sweetbreads and mushrooms was the kind of dish that made the room pause, just slightly, before the first bite. Not because it was loud, but because it was perfectly assembled. The vol au vent itself, French for flight of the wind, was a masterclass in puff pastry. Dozens of layers, butter folded and chilled, rolled and cut into flaky, hollow shells that rose in the oven like golden pillows. Hollow in the middle, but never empty. That's where the sweetbreads came in, the thymus glands of young veal, prized for their tenderness and rarity. These were no afterthoughts. They were soaked, blanched, peeled, and gently sautéed in butter until they melted in the mouth. To deepen the flavor, cooks added wild mushrooms, usually chanterelles or creminis, sautéed until just browned. Then both were folded into a velouté sauce, made from veal stock and a blonde roux, kissed with cream and a touch of Madeira wine. The mixture was spooned, placed, into each pastry shell with surgical care. A garnish of parsley. Maybe a paper-thin slice of truffle if the host wished to impress. And then, they were served warm, just warm, so the shell held its crispness and the filling pooled slightly when cut. In 1919, this wasn't just food. It was a power move on a porcelain plate. Sweetbreads were expensive. The pastry took time. The mushrooms were seasonal. This dish said, "We don't rush here. We do things right." And yet, today, it's nearly vanished, forgotten under the weight of fast food, frozen puff pastry, and fear of unfamiliar words. But now you know. Vol au vent of sweetbreads and mushrooms once ruled the finest tables in America, with quiet elegance and absolute confidence. It shimmered like silk, cool pale pink, light as air, and set on a plate like a sculpture from a forgotten dream. In the elite dining circles of 1919, salmon mousse with cucumber ribbons wasn't just fashionable, it was expected. Where other dishes relied on richness or flamboyance, this one thrived on subtlety. It began with poached fresh salmon, flaked by hand, not mashed. Every piece mattered. The flavor? Mild, oceanic, and unmistakably fresh. The salmon was then folded into a delicate mixture of whipped cream, lemon juice, and gelatin, seasoned with the faintest touch of white pepper and cayenne. Sometimes, a spoonful of chilled mayonnaise was added, for texture and sheen. This mousse was molded carefully, often in ornate copper or porcelain forms. Shells, rings, rosettes. Then chilled until it held its shape, soft yet firm, like the voice of a woman who knows she doesn't need to raise it to be heard. And the final touch? Cucumber ribbons, peeled into translucent strips with a paring knife, salted, and arranged in delicate loops or spirals around the base. Cool against cool. Green against pink. The perfect contrast of color, flavor, and texture. This wasn't food for hunger, it was food for harmony. Often served as the second course in a garden luncheon, it came on chilled china, with mint tea or sparkling water. No garnish was random. No flavor too bold. It was a performance in balance, and it required discipline to pull off. And now? It's nearly extinct. Salmon mousse has been overshadowed by noisy dishes, bulk recipes, and artificial shortcuts. But in 1919, it was a sign of culinary sophistication and emotional restraint. Because sometimes, the most powerful dishes, like the most powerful people, speak softly and leave you stunned. To dine like the upper class in 1919 wasn't about how much you ate, it was about how it was made. And nothing embodied that better than chicken liver pâté en croûte, a dish that took hours to perfect, but was devoured in elegant silence in just a few bites. It began with fresh chicken livers, gently cleaned, trimmed, and soaked in milk to draw out bitterness. Then sautéed in butter and shallots, kissed with brandy or Madeira wine, and reduced slowly until the mixture thickened with richness and depth. But this wasn't just a soft pâté in a jar. This was en croûte, meaning it was baked in a delicate pastry crust, much like a miniature meat pie, but far more refined. The liver mixture was pureed until smooth as silk, often blended with cream, butter, and egg yolk, then layered inside a pâte brisée, a short, flaky dough that browned like antique gold in the oven. Sometimes, minced mushrooms or even a thin layer of ground veal were added to create texture and contrast. The top was sealed with care, vented for steam, and brushed with an egg wash that gleamed like lacquer. Once baked, it was chilled overnight, then sliced like a tranche, revealing layers of smooth pâté wrapped in buttery crust. Served cold, in thin slices on fine china, it was often paired with a dot of fruit compote or a smear of mustard, not to mask the flavor, but to frame it. This wasn't peasant food. This was old-world luxury, adapted for a new-world elite. And today? We buy chicken liver as a cheap cut. But back then, to serve it en croûte was to say, I know exactly what I'm doing, and I'm not in a rush. A forgotten art. A vanished voice. But here, in this recipe, it still speaks. Refinement through restraint, richness through skill. It wasn't meat. It wasn't rich. And yet, this dish made it to the finest tables of San Francisco and the East Coast elite. Celery Victor was proof that elegance could come from humility, as long as it was dressed correctly. Created in the early 1900s at the famous St. Francis Hotel in San Francisco, Celery Victor quickly became a fashionable staple in high-class luncheons across the country, especially during the spring and summer seasons. At its heart was a single, underappreciated vegetable, celery. But not the limp sticks you find in lunchboxes today. This was thick, white celery hearts, harvested at peak tenderness. Only the innermost ribs were used, crunchy, juicy, and full of delicate flavor. The stalks were braised gently in seasoned veal stock or chicken broth, just enough to soften them while infusing subtle umami. Then they were chilled, very deliberately, until they took on a cool, toothsome bite. What made it special wasn't just the celery, it was the vinaigrette. A bright, tangy mixture of olive oil, vinegar, and fresh herbs, sometimes laced with mustard seed or tarragon, was poured over the celery just before serving. The dish was often plated on crisp romaine leaves, garnished with pimentos, capers, or slices of hard-boiled egg. To modern diners it might seem plain. But in 1919, Celery Victor was the talk of culinary circles. It reflected a new movement, lighter fare, more vegetables, more European influences, and an appreciation for dishes that let ingredients shine without heavy sauces or showy technique. It was clean, clever, and confident, a vegetable course elevated to centerpiece status. And now? Forgotten by nearly everyone. But for a brief time in American food history, Celery Victor was a celebrity. And now it's back on your plate. It didn't shout. It didn't try to impress. And yet, this salad was unforgettable. A whisper of bitterness, a kiss of floral vinegar, and the crisp snap of greens that danced across the plate like fine lace. Watercress and endive salad with violet vinegar was not a side dish. It was a palate cleanser for the soul, served between heavier courses, designed to refresh and reawaken the senses. In 1919, Before the days of pre-mixed salad bags and bottle dressings, this dish required intention. The greens were chosen for contrast. Watercress, sharp and peppery, always trimmed fresh. Belgian endive, pale and crisp, with just the right touch of bitterness. Together, they were tossed gently, not drowned, in a vinaigrette made from violet vinegar. This wasn't a supermarket find. It was steeped at home, a slow infusion of fresh violets in white wine vinegar, aged for days until it took on a soft floral aroma and delicate purple tint. The vinaigrette was finished with a few drops of olive oil, a pinch of sugar, and sometimes a whisper of lemon zest. Poured lightly over the greens, it turned a simple salad into a fragrant, edible memory. Presentation mattered. Served on chilled porcelain, garnished with a few scattered violet petals or a thin curl of orange peel, it looked less like a salad, more like a still life painting. To the elite hostesses of the silk stocking district, this salad said, "I know restraint. I know balance. I know beauty." And while it may sound delicate today, in 1919, this was quiet power, the culinary equivalent of a handwritten poem. Forgotten now, even among food historians. But once, this salad spoke volumes, in just a few perfect bites. It didn't need frosting. It didn't need fire. It just needed a mold, a steady hand, and an eye for beauty. In 1919, grape charlotte russe was a dessert of elegance, the kind you unveiled, not served. A cloud of cream, sponge, and sweet fruit, made not to fill but to float you gently toward the end of a perfect meal. At its heart was a base of ladyfingers or sponge cake, soaked, not soaked through, in a mixture of grape juice or light dessert wine, just enough to perfume each bite. The lining of the mold was important, precise placement of the cake along the edges and bottom. Every piece had to hold its place, forming a shell to cradle the filling. And the filling? A whipped mixture of grape jelly, stabilized with gelatin, folded into softly whipped cream. The result was not gelatin, not mousse, but something in between, light, trembling, and elegant. Once poured into the mold and chilled for several hours, it was unmolded with care, revealing a glowing center of pale violet, ringed in golden sponge. Often, it was garnished with halved seedless grapes, whipped cream rosettes, or even tiny candied violets if the cook was truly showing off. This was a dish of subtle luxury, sweet but never cloying, showy but never vulgar. And unlike today's towering layer cakes or artificial frostings, the charlotte russe didn't try to impress by excess. It impressed with stillness, with silence, with grace. In the silk stocking district, it was the final note in a carefully composed meal, a cool, floral farewell before coffee and conversation. And though most people today have never heard its name, back then, this dessert spoke volumes without ever saying a word. Some desserts spoke softly. This one barely whispered. But when it arrived at the table, all eyes followed. In 1919, peach Bavarian cream with gold leaf wasn't for the masses. It was for those who entertained behind velvet curtains, where every bite was curated and every shimmer had meaning. The base was a Bavarian cream, not pudding, not mousse, but something between a custard and a dream. It began with egg yolks and sugar, slowly tempered over steam, thickened into a silky custard, then blended with pureed ripe peaches, not canned, but fresh, poached and peeled by hand. To hold its shape, the mixture was lightened with whipped cream and just enough gelatin to tremble ever so slightly when touched. It was then poured into decorative molds, shells, domes, fluted towers, and left to chill for hours until it became a cool, delicate sculpture. But the real showstopper? Gold leaf. Thin, edible sheets, often imported from Europe, were laid gently across the top just before serving. Not for flavor, not for texture, but for the message it sent. This dessert is not necessary. It is art. Served unmolded on porcelain plates, garnished with a single mint leaf or fresh peach sliver, it was as much a display of taste as it was of wealth. And to taste it? So, not too sweet. A whisper of fruit followed by the rich, melting cream that lingered only as long as the moment did. Most today wouldn't recognize it. We've lost the art of desserts that float instead of fill. But once upon a time, Peach Bavarian cream with gold leaf was how high society said goodbye to a perfect meal. Gracefully and in gold. They were small, but they spoke volumes. At every 1919 luncheon, on every silver-tiered tray, there was a version of this dish, finger sandwiches that weren't made to satisfy hunger, but to impress through precision. Potted shrimps and tarragon butter was one of the most elegant fillings of the era, whispering of imported spice, delicate seafood, and a mastery of subtle seasoning. It started with tiny pink shrimp, gently poached in court bouillon, then chopped fine and mixed with clarified butter, a touch of lemon zest, and most importantly, fresh tarragon. The herb lent a faint licorice aroma that lifted the richness and marked the dish as continental and refined. This mixture was then potted, pressed into ramekins and sealed with a thin layer of butter, then chilled until firm. It could be made days ahead, always ready for last-minute guests. When it came time to assemble the sandwiches, the butter was softened just enough to spread, then layered between thin slices of white bread, crusts trimmed, cut into neat rectangles or triangles. Sometimes, a touch of watercress or shaved cucumber was added for contrast, but never to overpower. These sandwiches were bite-sized diplomacy, clean, quiet, and curated. Passed around on mirrored trays, they demanded no attention, but always received it. In the salons of the silk stocking district, serving them meant you knew the rules of engagement. Small portions, big impression. And yet, today, we dismiss finger sandwiches as quaint. But back then, a well-made shrimp sandwich with tarragon butter was a sign of a well-run kitchen, a practiced hand, and a refined palate. The crust may be gone, but the story? We just brought it back. No pastry, no cream, no gold, just fruit, wine, and time. In 1919, when the last course arrived quietly in a cut glass goblet, you knew the meal was ending, not with excess, but with elegance. Madeira-scented fruit compote was the farewell, served chilled, sweetened just enough, and always seasonal. It was the hostess's final gesture. You are nourished. You are remembered. You may rest now. The fruit varied: poached pears, cherries, grapes, peaches, even dried apricots, rehydrated slowly until plump and tender. The key was not the fruit itself, but the syrup. Made from Madeira wine, rich, nutty, and slightly smoky, it was reduced gently with cinnamon stick, orange peel, and just a hint of clove. Not overpowering, just present. The fruit was bathed in it overnight, so by morning each piece was infused with memory. When served, it came not on a plate, but in cut crystal goblets, catching the light from gas chandeliers, glowing like stained glass. A silver spoon. A single mint sprig. Nothing else. There was no icing. No layers. No applause. Just quiet sweetness, and the end of a story told in 15 unforgettable dishes. We began with lobster in aspic, and we end here, fruit and wine, carefully composed, served with grace. Because in the silk stocking district of 1919, a proper ending mattered. And this was it. 15 forgotten recipes. 15 flavors of a world now vanished. But now, we remember. And as always, if this brought the past back to life for you, don't forget to subscribe. Because next time, we're peeling back another layer of America's hidden kitchen history. Until then, keep tasting the forgotten.